So given that we're about to start National Seafood Month, I wanted to do a little Aquaculture 101 because you hear all the time that I'm really championing those water farmers that are doing the great work on the water. But at the same time, I recognize the fact that there's a lot of concern because just like, as I've said before, you can farm chicken badly and you can farm chicken well, you can also farm fish and seafood badly and you can farm fish and seafood well. And you know, aquaculture is a viable solution in balance. So I'm going to start off by just saying, in an ideal world, we would have balance between what we eat that's farmed and that's wild, that's frozen and that's fresh. But the reality is, scientists and activists are sounding the alarm about the fact that human consumption of fish and seafood has outpaced fishers' ability to be able to catch that fish and seafood sustainably. And the answer is going to have to be farmed. And there are a lot of reasons why, but let's start with the fact that the earth is 71% water. So we have all of this water that we're actually, if we manage properly, we can farm on in an exceedingly sustainable way. Now, this is so different than a plant-based diet because if you think about it, we only have so much land to produce the vegetables, so many resources like fresh water, like trying to control the craziness of what's happening with our climate in order to produce those. But it's so much of a lower carbon footprint if I produce that fish and seafood with existing waterways, with existing water temperature, and all of the nutrients that are already in the water. But I have to do it right. So the next thing you should know is this. If we farm on water the size of Lake Michigan, so granted that is a large body of water, but not big and so big when you think about the earth and how much water that there is available. If we farm on the size of Lake Michigan, and this is according to a study that our friends Haley Froelich and Rebecca Gentry from the University of California in Santa Barbara, that we can actually stop pulling wild fish stocks out and depleting those stocks. Because in some cases, those stocks are either fish to or at capacity at a rate of 90%. So if we want to continue to be able to eat fish and seafood, to make sure that vulnerable communities that are island nations have access to wild seafood, we have to look at how we can sustainably raise fish and seafood. And this is a input system from our great friends that are doing regenerative aquaculture, meaning seaweed and sea kelps that actually will help clean the oceans and sequester carbon in as much as they're delicious to eat. And we've talked a lot about that. And then we've got shellfish that don't have any carbon inputs, that we don't have to worry about things like waste or feeding them, that live and filter water off of existing waterways and oceans. So another one that's very regenerative, from clams to oysters to mussels. So we should be enjoying those in a farmed, sustainable way. And then we've got the finfish. And the finfish now, we know if we're using feed models that do not rely on marine ingredients, meaning we don't want to put a lot of feeder fish into the feed of a carnivorous fish like salmon because it's depletive on the oceans. But we don't need to do that as much anymore. So making sure that you understand those feed inputs. We want to make sure that whenever we're feeding a fish on a farm, we're feeding it sustainable, non-GMO ingredients, that we're not using things like chemicals or antibiotics. And certainly that in addition to that, we're thinking about things like packaging and carbon footprint in the way that we transport this fish. Because we are a global food system. That is the way that it's going to be. And in order to make sure that fish and seafood, a nutritious, delicious, viable ingredient is available to all, that we all have access to it, we've got to make sure that we're farming as sustainably and that we're managing the oceans in the right way so that we have balance across the planet and we have fish and seafood for generations to come.